Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. I'm speaking with my friend Stephen Olikara, who is a progressive populist, about the division industrial complex and how the political machine keeps the two sides fighting with each other while they grow their power and their money. Check it out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Stephen, how's it going?
Great to see you. This is a cool spot. I had described this as American history meets rock and roll meets the libertarian hipsterism. I mean, I love this.
Well, I have my little temple to Jerry Garcia over there.
Oh, I see that. Okay, nice.
And my favorite progressive metal band, Rush, is over here. So we do have a little bit of rock and roll happening.
And I grew up on rock and roll. Do you feel like there is a connection between libertarianism and rock culture?
The drummer from Rush was an actual libertarian.
Huh.
And he would write these lyrics when I was like 13. This is when I was turned on to this stuff. So for me, there's a very explicit link because the lyrics that I was into led me to all of the books I read that turned me into like a full-fledged secret handshake card-carrying libertarian.
Nice.
So I think,
wow.
Yeah, like that. And there should be a punk element to libertarianism, just, standing up against the man, questioning authority always.
Yeah.
And if we're doing that, I think I'm going to draw more people into libertarianism.
Yeah, I feel that. I mean, there's an anti-establishment nature to punk rock that appealed to me in the 1990s when I started playing guitar. And then on top of that, this mental, this attitude of self-expression, like be your most unique self. And I think in the libertarian movement, you are constantly fighting the binaries in our politics. So it really is, I guess you agree, it's a punk rock movement in politics.
Yeah. And I live in DC, so you have to be comfortable being very lonely.
Yes.
But that's okay. What I always say is if I have to be standing alone, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm always more interested in being part of a community, but it has to be based on the principles that I espouse, which is, live your life as long as you don't hurt people or take their stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
So what kind of music are you into?
I grew up on 90s rock, like Nirvana, Green Day, Weezer really got me started on guitar and drums, which I picked up in. So guitar was third grade onwards, and then drums was fourth grade, and really changed my life. Got really deep into jazz music when I was in middle school and high school. I had a 70s era funk band that would play like James Brown, Earth, Wind and Fire, Sly and the Family Stone, Tower of Power, and then had a hip hop band that sounded like the Roots, a punk rock band called Ferocious Green, highly influenced by Green Day, and a Radiohead-esque band. I had an Eastern European folk band. A lot, yeah.
So you're all over the place.
All over the place, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
A lot, not all of those, but a lot of those influences I'm really into.
Yeah.
I'm the weirdo that likes electronic Radiohead better than guitar Radiohead.
I like them both.
And I'm sure that's a sinful thing to say, but so you and I were just at this gathering called the Civic Collaboratory. We're not allowed to talk about what happens there, but you and I have been part of this group, which leans pretty progressive.
Yeah.
I always call myself the token libertarian at this gathering that began when I debated the founder many years ago, and we found that we were actually agreeing on some things. And Eric Liu has actually been on this show. He was one of the first progressives brave enough to come on and have a conversation with me. And when I started this show, I actually aspired to have a real ideological balance to the extent that was possible. I wanted people from the right. I wanted people from the left. It hasn't really worked out that way, because to convince somebody that knowingly disagrees with me requires a level of trust.
Right.
Do I trust you to have an honest conversation? Do I trust my audience enough to allow me to talk to someone that they probably don't agree with very much? Does that person trust their audience, or is everyone going to feel betrayed at the end? Like, the complexities of this are kind of a microcosm of where we are today. And I wanted to bring you on. I think you probably lean a lot more left than I do. I'm not sure that's true, but just based on your political activism history, I think that's probably true. And I want you to talk me off the ledge.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty black-pilled about the possibility of the tribes coming together for peace talks.
Yeah.
I think it's gotten really, really weird since Trump got elected the first time, and certainly since COVID and lockdowns and that kind of stuff. It seems like people are just on different planets now.
Right.
I'd like to believe that neighbors could still talk, but in my bubble, it doesn't seem that's true anymore.
Yeah. Well, first, let's talk about why it's important we do talk. Going back to the founding fathers, James Madison in the Federalist Papers talks about the violence of faction. And George Washington in his farewell address warns us of extreme factionalism. And when you'd have that occur in American politics, sort of predicting what would happen in a two-party system, it would create fertile ground for authoritarian tendencies to rise and facilitate foreign corruption and influence. So, in other words, some of these key founding fathers like Washington, Madison, I would argue Jefferson as well, really thought that extreme partisanship and toxic polarization would be a direct threat to liberty in America. So that's one reason to care about whether or not we can talk to each other across our political lines. On top of that, in a country as diverse as ours, I think you're a lot happier as a human being if we're able to talk to people who are different than you in a honest way, as you were describing earlier, Matt. And by the way, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm really grateful to be here.
Well, we'll see how it goes. maybe this will devolve into an ugly fight.
No. And yeah, and so I think it is fun to have these conversations. I enjoy it. I think one reason I feel a calling to be on podcasts like this and other political talk programs is because I want to bring that joy to as many people as I can. There's a lot of research that even shows that having political talk across difference is healthier for your immune system. People like Arthur Brooks have pointed to this in his book, Love Your Enemies. So there are many reasons to do it. Most of all, if you care about making progress on a topic, it matters to be able to build coalitions across the political divide. So it really matters to do this. Now, you mentioned being, I guess, a little bit less hopeful than I am on the prospects for our tribes to kind of get together. And when you see the kind of images we've seen in Los Angeles recently with the protests, riots going up against the ICE agents there and the federalization of the National Guard there, those are the kind of images that seem eerily similar to the film that came out, the Alex Garland film that came out last year called Civil War, which imagines what a second American Civil War would look like. And I do think that we are living in a cold Civil War. So I'm pretty...
This is it's fictional, right?
It's fictional.
Yeah, I watched it. It was...
Yeah.
It was scary and compelling.
Yes, exactly. So I think we are living in a cold Civil War right now. It's getting hot at certain moments, like we're describing in LA, but also I would say the burning or keying of Tesla cars over the last few months is another example of where a cold Civil War is getting a little bit hot. And there are other examples too. Obviously, there was an attempted assassination on President Trump. So I'm clear-eyed about all of these things that we're seeing. And yet, I think when you look at what's happening in local communities on a human-to-human level, people are not only much better than we realize about having conversations across difference, but actually want to. I see such a high demand for it, but often a dearth of skills to do so. I think part of what's happening right now is we have what I call a division industrial complex that weaponizes our real political differences, which are fine and I would say even encouraged to have in a country like America, but it weaponizes those differences into feeling fearful all the time, and it convinces us to hate each other and believe that progress isn't possible. That division industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar industry that involves not only political elites and political parties, but also the social media companies and political media as well. And that industrial complex, I think, mimics a lot of the behavior of the military industrial complex, as well as the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and it needs to be disrupted. So I think the reason I feel hopeful is because I see demand on the ground. I'm pretty clear about what we need to reform and change in these systems. And if we can pursue those changes, which I can get into more detail, it's political reforms, it's change. I think we need to take on the algorithms at some of these social media companies. There are a few clear solutions that we can pursue. Then I think we can have a much healthier political discourse in America, which it's not uniform. It's a healthier discourse where we can have healthier conflict, and we don't have all these conversations that split up family members and friend circles, which is happening all across the country right now. So I think we can have a healthier politics when we can reunite with our family and friends and have these conversations.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with BlazeTV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it. There is this dichotomy, and I've worked with many groups, mostly libertarian and people left of center, starting with living room conversations. Joan there recruited me very early on. Maybe I've told you this story, but back when I was Mr. Tea Party, and she was Mrs. What was the group she founded?
I remember
the original.
It was a progressive group.
Yeah, it was a very iconic progressive group, and I've forgotten the name of it.
Was it Move On? By chance?
Move On.
Yeah.
It was moveon.org, which has in fact moved on. But but she and I discovered that we agreed on some really important criminal justice reforms, and she was brave enough to work with me, and I was very comfortable working with anyone that I agreed with on something, and that started conversations. And there's this dichotomy, like when I'm looking across the table from you, I'm going to try to find connection. Mm-hmm. If people are watching this and we're performing and we're supposed to debate with each other, we're not even going to try to connect.
Right.
We're going to try to score points.
Right.
And I love this phrase, the division industrial complex, and comparing it to the military industrial complex, because I think it's pretty much pieces of the same apparatus. Because if we're divided, we're probably not noticing what we should be focused on. But I want to get into that, and I want to get into what's going on in LA and pick your brain on this. But give people a little bit of your resume, because you've founded more than one organization that's been working on this particular question.
Yeah, that's right. Well, coming out of college, I just, for a little bit of my political background too, because you kind of hinted at this earlier. I first got involved because I was a musician and a radio DJ in Milwaukee, and I see Obama give his 2004 convention speech, and he talks about how we're not just red states and blue states, we're the United States. And that to me is a compelling vision for American democracy. So I got involved initially through the Obama wave, and I quickly saw just how difficult it would be to implement that vision. But that ultimately led to founding a national organization called Future Caucus, which is the largest cross-partisan organization of young elected leaders in the country. The idea being that if we can develop and connect and cultivate this next generation of leaders in Congress and state legislatures, they might be able to come together on a set of issues that are not about left versus right, but rather future versus the past. And we found so many issues, including, like you already referenced, criminal justice reform, clean energy is another great one that we found a lot of commonality on, economic innovation and having a skilled workforce. So there are a lot of great issues there, and so that organization grew, and now I think nearly 2,000 young elected officials are a part of it, and we're passing great legislation on a monthly basis probably, and it really got me thinking, how do we actually change what's in the zeitgeist of our country? So I did run for a U.S. Senate in Wisconsin, which was a great experience. I sometimes like to joke, I actually at the end of the campaign got to see the smoke-filled rooms and live to tell the tale, and now I'm very open in telling those tales.
This was the Ron Johnson seat.
Yes, the Ron Johnson seat in Wisconsin. And then to really change.
Let me ask you about this, because I knew you ran. I have no idea what your platform was, and I know that there was sort of an anointed leader in the Democratic primary. What was your big issue, and what was the big difference between you and the guy that won the nomination on the Democratic side?
My number one issue was ending legalized bribery in Congress, ending the system of money in politics that is corrupting elected officials, that's causing them not to do their jobs. Instead of spending their daytime hours doing legislating, they're actually across the street raising money from lobbyists and big money special interests.
So corporate fundraising more so than insider trading?
I was the only candidate to call for banning insider trading. I was also proudly the only candidate, Democrat or Republican, to call for term limits on members of Congress too. So I ran a very independent.
Can you run as a Democrat on term limits?
I did, actually. We had T-shirts that said "term limits are sexy," and we had a lot of support, especially among young people, for that. So I ran a populist campaign. We had the endorsement of people like Andrew Yang in that campaign as well. And a lot of actually we had a really kind of motley crew of people that came together in our campaign. We had some former Bernie organizers. We had former Trump voters. We had people who obviously supported Andrew Yang. The Yang Gang really got behind us. So it was a really wide in many ways, it was the coalition of my dreams that I always sought to create, and to do that in the middle of the country in Wisconsin was really great. And I felt definitely the high moment of the campaign was our U.S. Senate debate, when we finally had the platform to get our ideas out there. And I'll never forget going to a Badger game, a football game soon after that, and there was a woman there who couldn't wait to come and talk with us. And she said, I'm a longtime Republican in northern Wisconsin, but I watched the Democratic debate, and you were the only person up there making sense, and you're going to be the first Democrat that I vote for in life. So I loved being able to elevate some of the political reform ideas to people in a grassroots populist kind of way. And I came away even more hopeful that kind of message can really resonate.
Did you feel like you mentioned Bernie and Andrew Yang, who in a lot of ways, both of them, when they were running, felt pretty disenfranchised from the Democratic machine. Did you have that experience?
Yeah, definitely. And I think right now there's a conversation in the Democratic Party about neutrality, because David Hogg, as a DNC vice chair, is talking about supporting some candidates who he calls do-nothing Democrats. And so the Democratic Party is saying neutrality, we all have to be neutral. But that's not entirely consistent. The Democratic Party is only neutral when it comes to non-establishment candidates. Mm-hmm. When it comes to supporting establishment candidates, that neutrality is out the window very quickly. Yeah. And so we did have an establishment candidate that they had decided to support from the beginning. And I would say there are a lot of parallels kind of with the with this past presidential election, where there were people like Dean Phillips saying Biden is not going to run, but Dean Phillips was blacklisted in the Democratic Party. And in our race, I wasn't the only one saying that establishment candidate is not going to win a general election. And so, the party establishment can prop someone up to win a primary, but in a state as politically diverse as Wisconsin, you need a bridge building kind of candidate. And so the net result was that establishment candidate was the only Democrat in a swing U.S. Senate or gubernatorial race in 2022 to lose. And it just shows that, the party elites can't expect to defy the will of the people and say, we're going to make choices on your behalf and expect that to win. And it actually deals with a deeper cultural issue with the Democratic Party and why, to be honest, I'm more of an independent populist now as a result of what I've seen happen in the Democratic establishment over the last couple of years, which is this basic culture that says, we know what's best for you, as opposed to we want to hear from you. And that is a party culture that I do not subscribe to and I want to have nothing to do with. And it was honestly the kind of culture that I think Democrats rebelled against Republicans 20 years ago. The family values Republican Party said, we know how, we want to tell you how to live your lives. And you had a lot of progressives saying like, no, we want to be free to live lives the way we want to. And now you're seeing that culture has infected the Democratic Party. So yeah, I came away definitely disenchanted by the establishment, and I'm not the only one. That's why the Democrats are losing elections.
Yeah. I mean, having tried to do insurgent movements within the Republican Party, having tried to work with the Libertarian Party, I got to tell you that the game is rigged.
Yeah.
And in my lifetime, there's been sort of key moments on the Republican side, much like the Democratic side. What the DNC did to Bernie is almost precisely what the RNC did to Ron Paul when he was running.
Right.
Even at a point where Ron Paul obviously wasn't going to win the nomination, they just didn't want him on the stage. Period.
Yeah.
So you have this, and I think small p populism. I call myself a libertarian populist. I think that's the right side of history, because the other side is the machine.
Yeah.
And it's a collusion of government power and corporate power, and I hate it. But the question is, can you break it? And what does a truly democratic politics even look like?
What's so funny about this, like squashing and even sort of censoring of ideas that goes on, both parties are guilty of this, is in our race, we would always see at these grassroots events that we're lighting it up. Like we would get the most applause out of all the candidates and you could really feel the energy. So naturally we wanted to have a debate to be able to really get the ideas out to a statewide audience, and all the other campaigns in the party were making an extra effort to make sure there were no debates. And just the moment that there is a debate and there's no filter, it's just you and a camera and the audience, you could immediately see that kind of electricity come out. Even some of the establishment Democratic pundits the next day came out and said like Olikara was the winner of the debate. He had the strongest performance. Where did he come from? That kind of thing. And then just as those sparks are flying, the Democratic establishment effectively ended the race 10 days before the election. They said, we don't want to wait to hear what the people have to say. We're going to violate our bylaws and endorse the establishment candidate. And I got phone calls from a number of senior Democratic leaders calling to apologize to me why they're not only breaking their bylaws, but breaking their promise that they had made to me to be neutral in the primary. And so this parallels the examples that you're sharing too, that there's this fear of what people think. And if you just let ideas breathe a little bit, if you let people express their voices, that's the kind of democracy I believe in.
It's kind of ironic that the Democratic Party
is anti-democratic.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not playing with words, but I want to define my terms. Like I would consider myself radically democratic. And by that, I don't mean just the idea that 50% plus one wins and then gets to do whatever they want to the other 49.9%.
Yeah.
I think that's a very vulgar and potentially dangerous version of democracy. But I like the sort of democracy, this isn't a perfect analogy, but I like the democracy that is Spotify, where I can listen to my weird very fringy end of the tail of the internet versions of music that I like. But if someone wants to listen to Taylor Swift, more power to them.
Yeah.
Just don't make me do it.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, I like that.
And our politics today is you either get Taylor Swift or what's the most obnoxious country musician? Logan. Most obnoxious country musician.
No, I don't listen to that stuff.
Okay, never mind. My metaphors died, but it would be like forcing everybody to choose one of those two things.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the dilemma, because ultimately, as we get closer to elections, and I think even Andrew Yang ultimately endorsed the Democrat in the presidential election, right?
Right, he did.
Because they make it so that you have to choose their candidate or that really bad guy on the other side, and that we go through this cycle every 2-4 years, and it's pretty disheartening for anybody that imagines that we could give people in democratic America choices that they would actually be proud of.
Yeah, I think the fear of giving people choice among the establishment is worth kind of analyzing as a psychological phenomenon, because I've seen Democrats make, including in our primary, choices that were prioritizing control over winning. Because in our case, when I was getting those phone calls apologizing why they're breaking all their promises to me, and everyone from the outside is like, "What?" It's kind of like the Bernie moment in when Pete Buttigieg dropped out and Amy Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed Biden, even though he was Bernie was on his way to potentially win that primary. A similar dynamic happened in our primary, where suddenly all these candidates started dropping like flies. This all happened in like 1 week, basically. And so then all the attention turned to us saying, like, are you going to drop out as well? I got all those phone calls. And I shared with them, these party leaders, are you aware of X, Y, and Z with this establishment candidate? Because it will be an issue in the general election. And they said, yes, we are. So they are aware that these problems exist. And then the other reason was the money. They said, well, we can raise, a little bit more money in the next 10 days. And I said, aren't you concerned about disrespecting voters and not making them feel like they can make their voices heard? And they said, well, it's more important that we can just like raise this money over the next 10 days. And so it's prioritizing money over people's voices being heard. So I think part of the psychological phenomenon here is what you know, and especially in politics, you're afraid of what you don't know. And among these party leaders, they've got into those positions by succeeding under a certain system and maximizing it for their own benefit. And so anything that comes off as a different message or a different system, like I support open primaries to address the kind of duopoly problem you were referencing earlier, I think it's just different. They don't know how to win under those circumstances, so they want nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, if you actually poll this stuff among Americans to make voters have more of a say in their in their leaders, not to have these fake elections, but have real elections, people want to be part of that. So I think it's an interesting dynamic, psychologically.
Yeah. And I'll say this, and I'm just going to make a wild guess that you're not a huge Donald Trump guy, but he is the first candidate, I think, in this breakup of the top-down party leadership. He's the first guy to sort of take over a party, at least since maybe since Abe Lincoln. And watching and now he is the party, so it was impossible to run against him in his last primary. But he broke the system, and the Democrats team seem still hell bent on preventing a real primary.
Yeah. I mean, this next one will be really interesting leading into 2028. It will start in 2027, and the positioning is happening now. It can be the first truly open Democratic primary since 2007 and 2008, where not the establishment candidate, Barack Obama, emerged and defeated the Clinton machine, which was in my view, one of the greatest political victories in my lifetime, on par with Trump winning the 2016 Republican primary against the establishment there. So we don't know yet if the Democrats will have an open primary. I still think the people in charge are still too fearful to have an open primary. And even though the moment is perfect for it, like there's clearly no field clearing candidate, it's wide open. Democrats are in the wilderness now, which usually means a new voice, a new movement can emerge. It's all set up for them, and yet there's a good chance they still shoot themselves in the foot.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we create at Free the People. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty, independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show. Let's start a fight about immigration. And I'll lay out my position that I've had probably my entire life. I've certainly thought more about it as I get older, and I watch all of these problems emerging with illegal immigration and the way that I believe both parties view immigrants, legal and illegal, essentially as political pawns. And I say that because there's all sorts the same divisions in the Republican Party. You have sort of a pro-immigrant wing and a anti-illegal immigrant wing, and then a wing that actually just never wants another immigrant to come to this country.
Yes, I've met that wing before.
Yeah. But there's also, like, I remember Bernie calling immigration a Koch brothers scheme. So you have this element of populist skepticism that immigrants somehow undermine American workers, and that is not just the U.S. Like I think anti-immigrant sentiment is almost everywhere, and it's a fundamental problem. But the position I've always had is that if you want to come to this country and work and follow the rules, we should have a system that is predictable and rewards that. But I don't think the Democrats want to do that. Mm-hmm. What's your take?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about the Democrats, and then I'll talk about my own point of view on this. I think the Democrats are too concerned with walking on immigration eggshells and not offending groups, instead of trying to have a sensible, humane policy at the border and in our immigration system. And as a result, we have not been able to get a comprehensive bill passed. I mean, even right now, in recent years, I would say there has been enough bipartisan votes to pass the DREAM Act to make sure that there is an orderly, humane process for people who are dreamers, who came here due to no fault of their own, but they are undocumented and are, for all intents and purposes, American citizens. But often Democrats have prevented that kind of legislation from moving because they don't want, it's all or nothing. Instead of getting a piece that can pass and make our system in our country a little bit better, it's getting this whole behemoth of a bill passed. So that's been a problem too. I really think that, the way I look at this debate is there's this kind of mushy bipartisanship that's been attempted, like the Marco Rubio bipartisan bill from a few years ago, which I guess he left because he started getting phone calls from the far right, and in the John McCain space. I actually think the interesting immigration consensus is on the other populist end of the spectrum. And the way I think about it is the sort of progressive heart in me is saying that we need to have a human system. There are people who are fleeing extremely dangerous countries who are seeking asylum. I've worked with individuals from countries like Sudan and Yemen who come here, escaping Al-Qaeda, escaping terrorist groups, and they're seeking asylum, and they've now successfully gotten their visas and now green cards are contributing members of American society now. That is something I believe in. And at the same time, I don't think it's that humane to be having millions of people living in the shadows in this country. So there needs to be a system to really prevent and ultimately stop illegal immigration, or people on the Democratic side would say undocumented immigration. And in order to do that, yes, there needs to be some smart border security. I don't think a wall actually is the smartest solution. You need, now technology and other forms to actually deter people. But I also think in terms of employers, right now, I think there's more we can be doing to disincentivize employers from hiring undocumented immigrants. And so my kind of view on this is like both left and right at the same time, that has an orderly process for people to become legal immigrants here. And by the way, the legal immigration system, to make sure we're attracting the best entrepreneurs to our country, people who want to go to grad school here and actually stay here and create jobs. Obviously, my family and my diaspora, the Indian diaspora, can definitely relate to that part of the story. Is really smart for our country to be able to compete in the 21st century. And at the same time, we need to prevent illegal immigration from happening.
So a libertarian twist on this, and here's a deep cut.
I'm ready.
In the 1990s, I think it was, my organization actually worked with Congressman Mike Pence to draft we never passed it, a guest worker program, knowing that, one of the main pressures on the southern border are workers that are coming to this country to fill jobs that are available.
Yeah.
But they get stuck here because they don't want to risk getting caught at the border and not being able to feed their families. And the idea was basically to have a private system that could link potential employers with potential employees, making sure the job is available to an American first, if that's a goal. And that would have taken a lot of pressure off the border. To take it even a couple steps further, I feel like the war on drugs has created so much of the chaos in Latin America. And the war on terror, the never-ending wars, the regime change wars, the neoconservative, let's make Afghanistan this perfect democracy just like our own, naive, stupid, and dangerous in my mind. You take a lot of pressure on immigrants fleeing the chaos and the violence if we would think a lot about what we're doing to undermine their ability to live safely there.
Yeah.
No one talks about that stuff. Instead, we make these potential immigrants political pawns. So let's fast forward to L.A.
Yeah.
Because I think.
Can I just add
Sure.
briefly that I think that to your point about immigrants and immigration becoming sort of a, not just like a litmus test, but I think part of the division industrial complex in the sense that there are far more incentives to keep immigration as an issue on the ballot as opposed to constructively resolving it, because both sides make way too much money on immigration as an issue. Obviously Trump made his initial brand out of building the wall and anti-immigration, and likewise Democrats want to be seen as the party of immigrants and want to be able to vilify the right for being anti-immigrant. And so both sides just fundraise way too much money on this for it to be resolved. But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a perfect tee up for what I was going to say about what I think is happening in LA. And I have not stayed glued to X to see the latest outrage. But from my perspective, and tell me where I'm wrong, Gavin Newsom seems to want this fight. Like, man, is he on social media working it, and hoping that the Trump administration and ICE cross the line.
Yeah.
So that he can be the winner in this battle, even though real people are getting hurt in the process. I think the mayor of Los Angeles is in the same boat. She wants this fight. I think they're both responsible for not dealing with public safety in a way that doesn't give the Trump administration an opportunity to bring, I guess they brought in the National Guard. They're talking about bringing in the Marines.
They're talking about it.
Which is insane.
Right.
And not very federalist at all.
No.
But at the same time, I don't know if you've noticed this from the Republican point of view, a lot of pro-Trump influencers on X who have been critical of Rand Paul and Thomas Massie for criticizing the big beautiful bill. One of the more questionable provisions in the big beautiful bill is a massive increase in spending on border security that now becomes an entitlement. And it's not just about border security, it's also about targeting illegals, mass deportation, as they say. So now the call on the right is we must pass the big beautiful bill because see what's happening in LA.
Yeah.
Cynical and manipulative.
Yeah. In the words of one of the protesters in LA who was smelling the tear gas, he said it smells like fascism. And what you're describing in what you might call the blatantly bloated bill, that Trump is putting out there, is sort of creating a sort of an ICE regime that I think is authoritarian in nature. And like you mentioned, the threat of Marines is this is going back to images of the Alex Garland film Civil War. I mean, this is the early kind of versions of that. Yeah,
but I think both sides want the war.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So
because it keeps us divided.
The only thing, exactly, and I think the only thing I'll add to that is not only Gavin Newsom, but I think Trump also strategically chose L.A. because if you think about it, there are undocumented immigrants in many, many cities. Why start with the L.A. here? And part of it is because if you think about the emotions and associations on the political right, you think California, Los Angeles, illegal immigrants, Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass. These are all words and triggers and figures that makes you on the political right say, I hate this and this is the America I want nothing to do with. And so when you spin up that kind of tribalism, you justify in your mind that, yeah, let's throw the National Guard on these people. Not very conservative or small government or federalistic to your point, but we're going to do that anyway. So it's like the ends justify the means. So this is the ultimate example right now of the division industrial complex. Both sides want this war. And obviously, to your point about Gavin Newsom, it's positioning him for 2028. And the only thing that doesn't get talked about enough is how, people are hurt by the system. I mean, we're all kind of victims of the division industrial complex in the LA story. It's people who are there on the ground. There is an orderly process that could happen that is not happening. And what's so interesting is I don't see anyone in the legacy or establishment media highlighting this point that you've raised here, which is both sides want the war. Both sides are making money off of it. And if that story were told more, then I think ordinary citizens who are not on this few streets of LA where this is happening. By the way, most people I hear from in LA are saying they're not seeing these images. So it's like really blown up. But for people who are not directly involved, who see this news, they're not aware of how the game is being played. I think it's our job right now to lift the veil on what's happening and say, this is how the game is being played. So you can call out these leaders on both sides for taking you for granted as a voter and for manipulating your emotions to fuel their political pocketbooks.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool. You may not agree with this either, and I'm going to put my Alex Jones hat on right now just to freak you out a little bit. But it does seem, first of all, when things get violent, there's a bright line, I think, between peaceful protest and civil disobedience and violence, and both in moral terms, but more important perhaps for their ends, strategic terms.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think violence is being fomented, and I think when people see those images, they're like, what the fuck's going on in LA? This seems crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The same way, I believe that there were bad actors on January 6th, which I was very critical of. And they lost whatever narrative they were trying to create. They lost when it got violent.
Yeah.
So I think the violence needs to be denounced. And again, picking on the governor and the mayor, they're not very keen on denouncing the violent aspects of their side.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's an instigation of violence being used for political purposes, which, by the way, is a big part of the plot of Andor. If any of your viewers have tuned into that show, I mean, it's very similar. I would say. Have you watched the show?
I have not watched that one, but I have super fans that have kept me generally up to speed.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, the authoritarian regime there is trying to instigate violent protesters to justify an even more authoritarian crackdown on people in this one planet.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's very cynical, but I think for people who are tuning in right now, it's important to get at the root of the issue. So we're talking about the division industrial complex. Well, one way to cut off part of the incentive for a war is by making it less profitable, and that gets into where the money flows in our political system. The reason why the military industrial complex is so effective, and who I was maybe naive enough to think that Elon Musk coming in with Doge and with the kind of mandate that Trump had in this election to say that we're actually going to take out waste, fraud, and abuse from the Pentagon, I believed for a moment that might be possible.
Yeah.
Now, call me crazy. Obviously, the Defense Department's only increasing in budget. And why is that, though? It's because these military contractors have so much power and money, and they can directly buy these members of Congress through lobbyist contributions. So my point in making that comparison is that similarly for the division industrial complex, we have to stop those flows of money. There are a number of reforms I think that could be helpful there that deal with fundraising and how these politicians raise money. But when money is the most important determinant or indicator of not just whether or not you win, but whether the party gets behind you, then it should be no surprise that the Gavin Newsoms of the world or Trumps of the world are doing whatever they can to maximize for money.
Yeah. So I've become pretty red-pilled on corporate influence, and I think that's been a bit of a blind spot on my side, and I say that as someone that has been highly critical of crony capitalists as long as I've been in town. But the way that I saw how big pharma was intertwined with the government agencies that were supposedly regulating their products was just kind of shocking to me.
Yeah.
But I wonder, and this may be where someone more progressive like you and someone more like libertarian like I can't really find common ground, because I don't know how to break the back of crony capitalism without moving money and power out of Washington. Because as long as it's a Game of Thrones, the big guys are going to win the game.
Yeah.
Because they have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And it could be military contractors, it could be big pharma. Fill in any of those blanks. It could be Palantir.
Yeah.
Pushing their latest surveillance system on Americans. As long as we've centralized power in Washington, D.C., I don't know how to stop that.
Yeah. Well, I think, there is a general mindset we can have of distributing power across America. And there are non-governmental ways to look at doing that. Like, for example, media, the political media could be more spread out across America. It shouldn't be that all these newspaper reporters who I've ever spoken with all live in Brooklyn, New York, and some of them in Washington, D.C. The storytelling, the stories of America need to be told by Americans across America, not in these concentrated power regions. And then on top of that, there have been discussions about federal agencies being more distributed throughout America, even more than it is right now. And I think that's really interesting. But I also think that one of the simplest things that we can do to address this problem is to ban lobbyists from funding members of Congress, and that can be done through a rules change in the House and Senate rules, and so it doesn't even take legislation necessarily. And another thing you could do, just through rules, is by not giving up committee seats to the highest bidders. Right now, and I found this on the campaign trail, many voters are shocked and outraged to hear that committee assignments have a price tag associated with them. The more powerful the committee, like financial services, the greater amount of money you have to pay to your party to get those seats. Well, the party leadership right now can say, we're not doing that. We're going to do this radical thing where we're going to appoint you to committees based on your expertise and experience, as opposed to how much money you've raised from...
Thomas Massey talks about this quite explicitly, and he'll give you price tags for how much it costs to be on Ways and Means. It's the Republicans at least don't even hide it, but that is definitely happening across the board.
And so that is exactly. And so I think that is an example of where left and right can find a kind of post-partisan
But you
consensus.
would need the people that rigged the game to unrig it, and that I don't know how we get them.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. But let me make one more point about legalized bribery and the growth of government, because when you have these entrenched incumbent interests that are able to write legislation, and again, this is another like peeling the curtain back moment for a lot of people. When I say write legislation, I mean lobbyists who are handing over legislative text to members of Congress. And part of the reason that happens is that the congressional staffers don't have time, sometimes don't have expertise to be actually writing the bill, so the lobbyists are doing it for them. Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to be expanding the size of government for those particular industries, subsidies and all kinds of things. So I think there can be a really interesting alignment here of small government, libertarians and conservatives, and clean government, good government, progressives who come together and say, we want the kind of reforms we're talking about. Now, your question is, how do we actually do that? And I'm clear-eyed about this, and I've fought these battles, and I have the scars to show for them, so I know it's not easy. But I do think it takes a combination of channeling the anti-corruption fervor that's already in the populist movements in America right now with simple ideas and language that can connect these two together. So, for example, when the Democrats took over the House after the 2018 election, they introduced H.R. 1, which was not, it was like a Christmas tree of liberal good government things. And they had this somewhat convoluted public financing scheme to address money in politics. I support some of those things, but not all of those things. But I think something much more simple, like 98% of Americans would say we don't want lobbyists funding members of Congress. I think on top of that, you could say we don't want members of Congress to fundraise during business hours. They're doing a day job on the taxpayer bill, on the taxpayer's dime. And in fact, I'd go even further and say that not to fundraise while Congress is in session. And so members of Congress can focus on doing their job as opposed to fundraising all the time. I think those types of ideas can both tap into the energy that's out there and is simple enough to understand that you create enough public demand. And I think we saw a parallel example with insider trading. If you go back like 15 years, very few people in the country knew that insider trading was happening on Capitol Hill. Now it's an issue that I would say most people I talk to have heard of. There are actual bills introduced, by some bipartisan efforts. It hasn't passed yet, but it's gotten much, much closer. So I think this is an example where I think raising the volume on how we can clean up government without, getting rid of this lobbyist contributions can change the politics on it.
So I think let's find a couple common ground things. Where the limited government crowd, skeptical of government power, libertarians, can coalesce with the good government crowd, and maybe defense is one great place. And I've been disappointed. The Democrats that I used to really respect on foreign policy have not been as consistent as they used to be. And I'll call out Bernie Sanders, who used to give speeches on the authorization of use of military force that sounded just like Ron Paul.
Yeah.
It was the same speech.
Yeah.
But hopefully we could agree that we should audit the Pentagon. Hopefully we could agree that we'd actually be more safe if we limited how many adventures our government could get involved in across the world. Is the progressive left still there?
Not nearly as much as it used to be. I come out of the tradition in Wisconsin of Russ Feingold, who was not only one of the most progressive, but also one of the most libertarian members of the U.S. Senate. And he got that libertarian track record both from trying to be a budget hawk, but also for being one of the only people to oppose the Iraq War and oppose the Patriot Act. And so progressives used to be more there. Our politics have transformed, particularly over the last 10 years, where now, as Trump was coming into office, he was talking more about anti-war positions than the Democrats were. And I think it's part of this political realignment where the political establishments are much more in the Democratic Party now. That includes the foreign policy establishment that has generally been more in favor of foreign adventurism and foreign military intervention. And I still think there are a few progressives out there who have, during our U.S. Senate campaign, the Ukraine conflict started.
Did you have Liz Cheney come out and campaign for you?
No, I did not, and would not have let her either. I think that was one of the biggest blunders of the Kamala Harris presidential campaign.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and Dick Cheney, they not only,
right.
It's one thing for someone to, you get endorsed by all kinds of people. So if Dick Cheney endorses your campaign, okay, whatever. But if you start elevating that as a badge of honor, as one of your core credentials, that you have the Cheney doctrine behind your Democratic campaign for president, you deserve to lose. That's not a campaign I want to be a part of, because I oppose that foreign policy. And so when the Ukraine conflict was starting, I was definitely the most forthright and the only one using the term anti-war during that campaign, and saying that that we need to be really careful about escalating this into yet another major conflict. So I'm not the only one. I would say Ro Khanna, progressive Democrat from California, has been pretty good on some of these issues, and I agree Bernie Sanders was pretty good on these issues. And anyone, whether you're a libertarian or progressive, talking about what the authorization for the use of force is usually someone you want to be paying attention to when it comes to foreign and military policy.
Yeah, to bring this full circle and close it out, when I first started these conversations with progressive friends, I was watching this really cool dynamic in Congress where my favorite legislators, Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, Mike Lee to a great extent as well, were finding that the Ro Khannas and Ron Wyden was there sometimes, particularly on privacy and surveillance. And you had what looked like a strange bedfellows coalition, which wasn't strange at all, because they actually fundamentally agreed on that issue. And those partnerships don't seem to happen so much anymore. But maybe starting today,
yes,
we can seed that again.
Yeah, well, I think the Democratic Party just needs, culturally and politically, needs to be less elite in order to get there. Because I'm a strong believer that culture precedes politics. So if you really want to know what's going on politically and why Democrats are and Republicans are adopting opposite positions from what they used to 10 years ago. You got to look at it culturally, and I think what would change the progressive Democrats' opinion as it comes to foreign intervention wars, and I think it's being less elite and less cozy with elite interests and reclaiming its culture as a working class party, a middle America kind of party. I think that would create the cultural space for some of these positions to change.
Culture is upstream of politics, as Andrew Breitbart used to say, and you said the same thing.
Me and Breitbart,
Yeah, you guys are like this. Final thing, and this is an opportunity to brag about some of your work, but we reconnected recently because we are both producing films and documentaries and other cultural engagement. What's the project you're most proud of?
Well, just to set the context, a couple of years ago, a few leaders in the Bridging Divide, building social cohesion in America space decided that, there's this movement all across the country that are having amazing conversations at the local level. They're building connection in America, but it's not really in the cultural conversation yet. And how do you do that at scale? And we know that storytelling and entertainment is one of the biggest levers to shape culture in America. There's a lot of research that shows that modeling bridge building behavior in films and TV shows and popular culture has an impact on people. They call that vicarious contact theory, where you in your own community, you might not be exposed to a bunch of different people, but you can on screen, and that still has a positive impact. And so that led to building the first ever entertainment office for this bridge building movement in America we call Bridge Entertainment Labs. So that's an organization that I'm running. And you're right, we get to advise, work with, consult with filmmakers and both documentaries as well as narrative features. In fact, last year we were brought in to Civil War, the film studio A24, got to meet with Alex Garland and the cast, including Kirsten Dunst, and talk about what are some of the solutions to toxic polarization to avoid a second American Civil War. So I was really proud of the campaign that we had coming out of that film, because you had suddenly these actors talking about the importance of listening to people who are different than them, which was cool. But this year we premiered a film. We worked with the Barry Levinson and his co-director Robert May on a film called Bucks County, USA, that premiered at Sundance, which explores the school board battles in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and how they're at each other's throats on so many issues, but how they're also striving to have conversations as well. So that film has been great. And then right now we're also consulting on a Disney and Pixar film that'll come out in a couple of years. So we're excited about that too.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So if people want to find your work, give us a full minute of shameless self-promotion.
All right. Well, easiest way is just follow me on social media at Stephen Olikara. Bridge Entertainment Labs is bridgeentertainmentlabs.org. And I should mention another big thing that I'm working on too is I'm a senior fellow at the Schwarzenegger Institute, working with Arnold Schwarzenegger on terminating polarization, nice. Which is very important in highlighting that this bridge building kind of leadership is an example of strength, that true leaders are people who can bring people together instead of vilifying and profiting on the division industrial complex. And then I do political commentary too. I've been showing up a lot on the Hills Rising show, so you can check that show out on YouTube.
Cool. Robbie Suave's been on this show a number of times.
Yeah, so. I've enjoyed sparring with him. He's been a lot of fun to talk with.
Us libertarians were so irascible. But we did a full hour without killing each other.
Yes,
so,
we did.
Let that be an example for everybody else.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.